Well, folks, when you hear that tune, you're in for a treat because it's time for another week of the Rec Poker Podcast. Thanks for joining me. I'm Jim Reed. Bluff Sterini and the Home Games are at Rec Poker Jim on Twitter. If you don't know what Rec Poker is all about, we're just a group of very enthusiastic amateur recreational poker players who love the game and love spreading our love of the game with the rest of the world. Every week, I get to hang out here and talk with my poker friends about this game that we enjoy so much. And most of what we do is free here at Rec Poker, so I have to thank our sponsors, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and Mark Prashon over at website AMP. And of course, I also have to thank our Wrecking Crew members because these are the folks that really make all the magic happen here at Rec Poker. If you want to learn more about the Wrecking Crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew, or you can just listen up because you're about to meet a couple of them right now.
My name is Eric Jin. I am Binkley on the Rec Poker forums or at Rec Binkley on Twitter.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I am PetVet33 or Fergie56 in the home game, PetVet or PetVet33 everywhere else, and the only woman on the Wrecking Crew. So come on, women. Come on. Let's get this more even.
That's right. I'm with you, Kim. We've got a number of very active women premium members, but you're the first one to take the step onto the Wrecking Crew. And it's coming up on a year. We've had Kim on here working her magic, doing her study groups, and contributing her amazing insights and ideas to the show. I'm with you. Let's spread that. Let's get some more women here on the show. One of the things I love to do here every week is introduce welcome back guests from the Chats edition of the podcast. If you were listening last week, we had Carlos Welch on to talk about facing continuation bets and how to defend against them. We had such a good time. He decided to come back, and now we're actually going to look at an example hand from the World Series of Poker this past year. I know I've been doing a lot of hands from the World Series main event this year, but it's because it's a bucket list item for me to play in it. I got to satellite in this year. I had a great time. I'm definitely addicted. I cannot afford to ever play it again in my life, but it was so much fun. I'm just going to draw out the fun as much as I possibly can here on the show. So, Carlos, thanks for coming back on the Rec Poker Podcast to talk to us about defending against C-bets again.
Oh, no problem. No problem. Thanks for having me.
So we'll just cut right to it. If folks didn't listen last week, just jump back an episode and you can hear about sort of some of the factors that we might consider when facing a C-bet. We'll talk about those. Those are mostly single raise pots where the player is in position player is the original open raiser. This is a little different. This is a hand from day 2 of the main event. I was in middle position, and the player directly to my left had been 3-betting me quite a bit. And so I was starting to suspect that this player was 3-betting with not just premiums. Let me put it that way. So I'm holding King of Hearts, Queen of Hearts. We're at level 6, which is a 400 small blind, 800 big blind, 800 ante. We're sitting on about 60 big blinds. And we open to 2,000, which is 2.5 bigs. The villain to my left 3-bets to 5,000, and it folds back around to us. So that's about 6.25 big blinds. If folks are doing the math at home, we open to, which is a respectable size in tournament poker to make 3-bets to. You can leverage some folds there without having to put too much of your stack in danger. So we're facing a small 3-bet. It's going to cost us 3,000 chips to continue. We've got the King of Hearts and the Queen of Hearts. I don't think folding is really an option because we're just getting a really good price on our call here, but we're going to be out of position and it's kind of a prestige event. Should this be a fold? Does anyone have any opinions about that?
I definitely would not fold. I do have some bad news for you.
Uh-oh.
I wouldn't say this is a respectable 3-bet size. I would say this is kind of a disrespectful size. It seems like this guy's targeting you.
Yes, I think that's true.
This is the size I would use if I wanted to isolate the opener, but I'm not really expecting a lot of fold equity. Generally, because you guys are 60 bigs deep, 2.5 is not big enough to generate much fold equity. I would expect him to go more like 6 or 7 if he was using a normal 3-betting range. It feels like this guy might just be 3-betting enough to get everybody else out so they can play against you in position.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. That it did. I did feel like this person was three betting a lot, and this was a. I don't think this was sort of their size. I think this was the size that they'd chosen typically to three bet to. If the opener raised a little bigger, they would size up a little bit. But that was kind of what they decided. I think there.
Yeah,
Eric?
and I do see some players using this size as a default. I think that's kind of a mistake. So if this player is doing that, then everything I said may not apply here.
Either one could be very much the case, though. I think that's true. Eric?
So you saw this player three bet other players besides yourself at this sizing?
Yeah, they were very active three better.
Okay.
But I don't. So they were three betting other players. I felt like they were also three betting me a lot. So I don't. It's probably a combination of them just being very comfortable three betting a lot. And we've talked before on the show in the main event, there's this weird dynamic where people overfold to three bets, I find. And so it becomes a very profitable exploit to be three betting a lot. But yeah, I can't say specifically. I wish I could say with more detailed accuracy about the sizing, but they were three betting a lot. Yeah. So there was some talk just before we jumped on and started recording here. There was some talk about whether this might be a good four betting candidate given the dynamics. We've got some blockers to some of the stronger hands they can have there. Kim, what's your take on that?
My take is this is mostly a call from this in this scenario. However, it can exploitably be a four bet because of in a vacuum. I think this is probably just a call.
Yep.
With yours. Sorry if my internet's not good. But in this scenario, I don't mind a four bet here.
I do think those 3 and 4 bets leverage a lot of fold equity in the main event. So it's a good tool to have in your back pocket if you feel like you've got the cojones to pull it off. I found for whatever reason on day 1 and on day 2, I was getting 3 bet a ton. And I never really squeezed the trigger on any light 4 bets, which is kind of what they were counting on when they 3 bet me a lot, right, Carlos? That's kind of what they're gaining. That's kind of what they're planning on.
Yeah, that's why I have I was going to say love-hate, but I think it's becoming a hate-hate relationship with this tournament. It's for that exact reason. Like you just talked about earlier off air, how this was a bucket list item for you. You don't know if you're ever going to get a chance to do it again. So it's so hard to 4-bet light when that's the case. And what I don't like about this tournament is that it takes good players who know what they're supposed to do and just make it so hard for them to do it.
That's true.
Yeah. So I understand why you did, especially like when you have to travel to get to Vegas from far away. It's like it would suck so bad to 4-bet this and get in a spot where you have to bluff it off. And I understand. But I think I agree with Kim. That probably would have been a reasonable exploit in this spot.
Yep. And I know you're always looking to exploit players when we can make good assumptions about them, right? That's the key. And we were getting some evidence that this guy was 3-betting wide, or at least often. Even in a day of poker, you can't necessarily say that it's wide or loose or weak, but the more often it happens, it's just not as likely they're getting aces and kings that often, right?
Yeah, especially when you have a king and a queen in your hand. Like that, this is going to be hard for this guy. Like, really? Aces again, buddy? Yeah.
All right. So as played, so we did call. So it's just the two of us in the hand. The flop comes the ace of hearts, 8 of diamonds, 4 of clubs. We've got the king, queen of hearts. So we've got a backdoor straight draw if 10 and a jack comes. We've got a backdoor flush draw if 2 more hearts come. And we've got king, queen high on an ace high board. So it's the nut, no pair. But in a 3-bet pot, I'm not sure how relevant that really is. But that's kind of what our hand strength is at that point. On a board like this, I think we're probably checking about 100% of the time to the 3-better, Carlos. Is that right?
Yes.
So we're going to be facing C-bets a lot. and this defending against C bets is the theme of the month. And so this was a spot where ace 8-4 rainbow, we're not going to have a lot of natural continuing hands, which means and the original raiser is going to have a lot of aces and big pairs. So they kind of own this board. They should be c-betting this board at a high frequency. They're going to use a small sizing because of that. And so we're going to face a lot of c-bets here. In the previous episode, we talked about kind of how to choose, Carlos, which hands to continue with and which ones to continue with as a call and which ones to continue with as a check raise. When the board's dry like this, you talked about maybe some backdoor hands with blockers, kind of like we've got here. But when it's a 3-bet pot and there's an ace on the board, it feels like that might change the dynamic a little bit. What's going on with that?
Yeah, I was just thinking that, like, the fact that this player is going to have so many ace-x hands in their range, us blocking the ace isn't, us blocking ace-king and ace-queen isn't that helpful for us unless we want to really go for it. Because this guy will have some weaker aces in those that if you were to check raise his hand, he'll call with those, but he might not call turn and river. Mm-hmm. But it's so hard to check raise flop and pull the trigger on turn and river here. So if that's something that you have to be honest with yourself, if that's not something you think you're capable of, I think it's okay to kind of just like, save that for the psychos like me who would do this in tournaments that aren't the main event, because even I don't know if I'm willing to do this in the main event, which is why I don't play it like I used to.
Yep.
But yeah, it's like, it would be nice if this was like, we kind of talked about this before. If this was King 8-4 and we had Queen Jack of hearts, now I'm way more likely to do that because now it's a benefit to us that this guy has so many ace-x hands in his range. But when the ace actually comes, we do have to be a little bit more careful. And I want to say you should have a number of suited aces and just like pocket pairs in your range that you have some other hands you can continue with on this board facing the bet where you don't have to get too crazy with king high.
Yep. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially in these 3-bet pots where they own this board so much compared to what we're going to be having here, and certainly compared to what we're holding. So we do check, and they bet the pot's about 12,000 at this point. They bet 3,500, which is just between a quarter and a third, which is a small enough bet. So we get a little optimistic maybe, and I just decided to call because I felt like I had the best unpaired hand I could have. I had 2 back doors and 2 high cards. If the guy's doing this with jacks or something, then maybe there's a chance I can outdraw him. But I was not feeling very comfortable. I think on a larger bet size, I think I probably just have to fold, even though I know I'm like leaving some money on the table when I do so. I just, given the spot, I probably fold. But he made it small enough that I felt comfortable continuing. Kim, what are your thoughts at this point?
My thoughts is this is mostly a fold.
Yeah.
But when you do decide to call here, I mean, that's okay. But on runouts that are good for our calling range, we have to make a move at some point in the hand. We're going to be out of position. So, for instance, if we call and the turn goes check, check, and the river's a blank, now we can lead to try and take this away. So we can't just call with the hopes of hitting our back doors.
Yep. Great advice. And especially when you think about the fundamentals of poker, we don't have a position edge. We're out of position. We don't have a range edge because we capped our range by calling on the previous street. And we don't have card advantage either on our specific cards because we've got king high. Like, we're really, I think you said it best, Kim. We're really just kind of like hoping to make a hand here. And in those spots, you do have to take control or try and take the hand away on some future streets. Ryan LaPlante talks about this all the time. Recreational players like us, we don't lead enough turns and rivers. We don't donk on enough post flop streets to kind of shake things up and introduce that taking control of the hand, which is something that I struggle with for sure. So any other thoughts on the flop? before we proceed, Carlos?
Yeah, I got one last thought on this. So when this player three bets, if they are three betting a wider range, first of all, their normal three betting range is going to contain hands like ace king, ace queen, ace jack, even, and some suited aces to bluff with. And a lot of players, if they're going to widen their range, they tend to like to add even more ace X hands into that range. So his normal bluffs hit this board. Even a lot of his like additional bluffs hit this board. And if you think about other hands in this range that don't like this board, you block them. Yep. So like kings and queens. So like this is like one of the worst hands to try to get out of line with on this board, because you really wish he had kings and queens. Like then maybe it's easy to find a way to take it away from him. But us blocking that, I think just kind of strengthens his range too much, given that even he's got value hands that hit that ace. He's got normal bluffs that hit the ace, and even maniacal bluffs that hit that ace. And we block the good hands that are always in his range that don't hit the ace. So yeah, we're in a really bad spot here.
Yeah. Well, I knew I was feeling uncomfortable at the time, and now I'm feeling even more unsure about how to proceed. It feels like we maybe this is just be a fold, given what I'm hearing here. Like, just feels like we don't have enough going for us to continue. So I think, and I'm making a pretty typical mistake here, which is I think my opponent's kind of getting out of line, and I'm just like holding on as a consequence. But that doesn't really change their plan much. You know what I mean? Like I'm not fighting back so much as just kind of staying in the hand. Eric, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, you're not discouraging him from his bad behavior.
Right.
You didn't bet him. You didn't put him to the test. He's always been putting you to the test.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's like Carlos is saying, that's kind of a dynamic of this tournament, where I actually felt like I was untethered from that scaredness, because I felt like this was on day 2, and on day 2 I'd already, I hadn't busted on day 1. I most of what I'd wanted to happen other than cashing it, I was at that point, so I wasn't afraid to pull the trigger. But I think it was even just kind of like preventing me from really weighing those options as heavily as I should have even. Okay, so we do call just because we don't believe them. It's not a good reason, though. It's not a good reason to do it. That's what we did. So the turn, the pot's 19,000 is the 5 of clubs. So the board is ace of hearts, 8 of diamonds, 4 of clubs, 5 of clubs. So it's pretty bricky. We check, and the villain checks behind. So what does this, to me, this kind of felt like, it weakens their range a bit, because they would typically want to continue getting value with their strong hands. I think they probably still have some decent hands that they're checking behind with here, especially when the backdoor flush comes on. But what do you guys think? Carlos, what's your interpretation when they check behind here?
I think you nailed it. This does weaken their range in the sense that they're probably going to continue betting any 2-pair better type hands and even like good top pair hands, but they'll probably start slowing down with some of their weaker top pair hands, as well as hands like kings and queens. And if they're really getting out of line with a lot of bluffs, then they do have some other hands that will maybe give up here, like maybe something like queen jack or something might decide that once you call the flop, you probably weight it towards an ace or something that you're not going to fold. So I think their range at this point looks like a few give ups and a decent number of hands that they are just trying to get the showdown with now.
Yep. And I guess there's something to be said now that there's a 4 and a 5 on the board. They have slightly fewer combos of those ace 4, ace 5 suited semi bluffs that they might have been using as a 3-bet earlier. But I still think they have. I'm not sure that's that big a chunk of what they were continuing with. It just occurred to me that might be interesting. So it goes check, check. The turn is the 5 of clubs. the river is the 4 of diamonds. So it pairs the 4 on the board. There's no flush comes in. If someone had 6-7 here, they would have made a straight on the turn, but I don't think. I mean, sure, they can have 6-7 sometimes if they're getting really out of line with their 3-betting. But
could you ever have 6-7?
I think I could. I think I could sometimes. Sometimes, again, it's a really small portion of the range. But
so, should we be leading this river, or
that's a great question? Because we're kind of looking at this through the lens of defending against c-bets, and when we think about the range that our opponent has chosen to c-bet with on the flop, and then they've checked behind on the turn here. So Eric, here's my question. When we've got king high, what hands are going to fold to, like, obviously all the hands that we beat are going to fold, but are we going to get them to fold like a 1-pair hand with our lead? Because we're leading as a bluff in that scenario, right?
Yes.
So I
like a lead here a lot if this is a single race pot and we're in the big blind. I love a river.
Yes.
We have everything. We have everything on this river. We're going to make kings and lower fold. Kings, queens, jacks, 10s, 9s, 7s, 6s, all those hands that are beating us, we're going to make them fold.
Yep.
So in this 3-bet pot, I don't think we have 6-7 very often.
Right.
We could have pocket 8s. We could have slow played pocket 8s here. We could have, we don't have many 4s. But the fact that he checked the flop, we can rep an ace here reasonably. And we can try to get pairs lower than the ace to fold.
Yep.
Jacks, 10s, 9s. We do block, like Carlos said, we block the kings, we block the queens, but maybe we can get jacks, 10s, 9s to fold here. I don't know.
And I think that's the most important thing.
Check on the turn.
Yep. Yeah, check on the turn. Yep. I think that's one of the most important things when we're thinking about leading in spots like this is to have a bluff target. Like, what are the actual hands that we're trying to get to fold? And I think you're right that a lot of those 1-pair hands that are going to be better than us, maybe we can give them a chance to fold here. What do you think, Carlos?
I agree with everything that's been stated. In fact, I just did a coaching session for 4 hours, and I probably used the word target about 40 times.
Nice.
So it's very important before you make a decision that you know what you're targeting. I love the way you broke it down with Eric in terms of if you're going to turn king high into a bluff, you need to be making him fold hands better than king high. And we're pretty certain he's not going to fold top pair. So now we're looking at, like Kim said, the pairs below the ace. Now it's just a question of counting the combos in that, like, how many of those pairs are there really in his 3-betting range? So we got, if we start with jacks, 10s, and 9s, that's 6 each. So that's 18. Another 6 for kings and queens because they dropped down to 3 and 3 because we block them.
Nice.
So that's like 20. If we just look at kings through 9s, that's 24 combos. And now we want to compare that to the number of combos of ace-x hands that he would 3-bet. This is where it really matters how out of line this guy's getting. Because if he's only 3-betting big aces and suited aces, there's not going to be that many combos. Because I think the big aces will continue betting on the turn a lot of the time. So we can discount those. So if we're looking at something like, say, ace 10 as his biggest ace that doesn't bet the turn, that hand alone is 12 combos. So that's already like half of the pairs that we're targeting. And then is he also 3-betting like ace 9 off? If so, that's going to be another 12. And then now once you start throwing in the suited aces, there's going to be 3 each of those. And at some point, he just has more aces than he has the pairs we want to target. And then on top of that, we don't even know if he's going to fold those pairs to a bet, especially the kings and the queens. If he's like most people, they get kind of entitled with those pairs. Like it's a lot easier to get this player off of like nines than it is to get them off of kings, even though they both lose to the hand that we're repping. So I think he has more ace-x hands than he has pairs, and I don't know if he's going to fold all the pairs unless we really go crazy here. I don't know if I want to bluff this particular hand. But to your point that you mentioned earlier, we could have worse hands here that we might want to turn into a bluff. But this one, I think with this one, I'm going to start with a check with this one. But it does feel very, very close to me.
Eric?
Yeah, so I guess maybe some of the key factors about our specific hand is we blocking the kings and queens, and maybe we have enough showdown value.
Exactly. Really depends on how out of line this guy's getting with his three bets. If he's getting out of line as Jim feels he's getting, then we might have some showdown value here for sure.
All right, that's good to hear. we'll go into how the hand plays out, but that is definitely how I was feeling. And I just wish like the problem was he hadn't gotten to showdown often because people were really overfolding a lot, and that was encouraging us all to 3-bet more. Like I was 3-betting a lot of ace reg, king reg hands because people were folding, and like I got kings once and I 3-bet them and everyone folded. Like, well, I'm not 3-betting kings and aces anymore because I'm never gonna get any value from them. So I don't know what is going through their other players' minds at the table as well. But I did kind of decide, that people are going to be 3-betting wider, and this was some people are not, but this was one of the players that was, and that was kind of my buckle up attitude about this a little bit. So we get to the river, it pairs the 4, we check, there's 19,000 in the pot, and the villain bets 7,500, which I thought was a good size because it made me feel very, very uncomfortable and that I should probably fold a lot. It feels like a pretty value-y bet. What do you guys think when it goes bet, call, flop, check, river? Sometimes I think people will put out like a quarter pot bet on the turn, and that always feels to me like, I don't know, I guess it's kind of villain dependent. And then some people put a big bet out, and this one felt like it was kind of 40%. It's kind of in the middle there a little bit. Do you guys have a sense of like what that typically means in spots like this when it comes to hand strength? Or here, Carlos, we'll start with you. How did you read that when it comes to the strength of their hand?
It typically means value.
Yeah.
Just because I'll steal a quote from Andrew, who likes to say, if the guy wanted to bluff, he could have done so on the turn.
Yes.
And so when he checks the turn, often what they're saying is that they're giving up, or they have a showdown value type hand. And now what you often see from players is that, like we mentioned earlier, like a hand like ace 10, they might decide to check that back on the turn, but then once you check again, now they feel better about their hand for value. So you see more of these thin value bets with this line than you do with bluffs, because if this guy has something like Queen Jack that he wants to bluff with now, why wouldn't he have wanted to bluff that on the turn?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that makes a lot of sense to me. So I really don't know if this was the right play or not. This hand is one that's sort of been going over in my head since then. I did call. I think I just got a sense that he was weak. I just got a sense that he didn't want to call. And I wish I could actually point to something specific that made me think that. Right now I could just be easily just rationalizing a bad call. So I don't know whether that's true or not. But I did call. He showed King 10 of clubs or king 10 of spades rather, which I thought was one of the very few hands that I actually could beat. He was so annoyed when I tabled king queen, and I just felt like, whew, that doesn't work very often. And it just felt like an interesting hand that I don't feel like I played particularly well, but that was kind of illustrative of what we're talking about. Hit me, Carlos.
Okay, I got some great thoughts on this.
Okay.
This is where the work happens right here. See, this is where you learn, because up until that point, you thought this guy was getting way out of line. Okay. And so whether your call on the river was right or not is kind of up for debate. Like, we've already talked about how a lot of decisions seem close. Like, Kim brought up the fact that it was close between a call or a 4-bet pre. We talked about how on the river is close between a lead or a check. So we're kind of in a gray area in a lot of spots. The way you clear that up is by watching showdowns. Now, if you're really doing your job, you can get this information in showdowns before this and hands that you were not even involved in. But the information you get in the hand that you actually play is you're kind of forced to get that because you were involved. It's like, easy to pick up on it. So what I've learned based on this showdown is this guy's not necessarily getting out of line. Like, king 10 suited is a very reasonable 3-betting hand here. This guy turns over like 9. What I'm trying to think, what was the board?
Ace 8-4 was the flop, and then 5-4.
So it goes check, and we win. And for a lot of people, that's all that matters. But it matters a lot to me whether we beat king 10 suited as opposed to beating like jack 10 off.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it goes check, down, I win against jack 10 off. Now I know your read has been right the whole time because the guy is getting out of line with his 3 bets. And now your call on the river is clearly correct because this guy's range is ridiculously wide. We win the chips in this hand, but we don't learn much from his showdown because he had a hand that's a reasonable 3-bet. I guess we do learn a decent amount about his river bet because I think he has a hand that itself has a little bit of showdown value. Mm-hmm. So the fact that he chose to turn that into a bluff, especially for that size, maybe we can like try to target him the next time that he uses that size on the river. That's something to think about. But the most important thing to think about is the fact that he showed frustration when you call. I lose all respect for this player when I see that. Up until the point that you said that, I was thinking this guy is a shark. And my first thought was he was targeting you specifically. Maybe he saw rec poker on your shirt and he was like, let me target this rec player. But then he said he was doing it with several players. But if the guy feels like he's a shark, he may think that, even the people who aren't wearing a rec poker shirt are recreational players. So he might be 3-betting a lot of people for this small size because he expects to have an edge on, random people at the table. Mm-hmm. But anybody that reveals his frustration about getting called there, to me, he's not a shark. He might be like one of these over-aggressive players that seem good to people who don't really know what to look for. But yeah, I lose respect for people when they show that kind of frustration at the table.
Yeah.
Kim? I'm just wondering what you think of his river sizing there. Like if he's trying to target an 8 to fold or something else that you called with on the flop, like another pair, like you don't have many draws that you're calling with there. He's probably not going to get an ace to fold unless you have a really poor ace. Like, shouldn't he be betting like a lot higher than that? A lot bigger bet here as trying to target whatever you called with on the flop to fold.
Exactly. Like his hand has some showdown value. So he's going through the same thing we went through, which is if we're going to turn his hand into a bluff, we need to be targeting pairs. And is a pair going to fold for this small size? Probably not. So to Kim's point, since he's targeting pairs, he should be using a bigger size. Now, let's say if he's really out of line and he's got like, 6 high somehow or 7 high, he has like completely no chance to win that showdown. Now maybe he can target some king highs and maybe choose a smaller size for it. So maybe that's what he was doing anyway, is that he knew that he couldn't get an 8 to fold. So he's trying to target a hand like king queen for some reason. But that's not very many. When you have king 10, targeting king queen doesn't make a lot of sense, because like there's like two hands better than yours. But if you got a smaller hand that can't even beat king high, then maybe you can use a small size, knowing that you're going to get called by an 8, but you're just trying to get the guy off of king high. That would make sense. But if he's going to turn king high into a bluff, he needs to target an 8. And if he's going to do that, like Kim said, he needs a bigger size.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like either he checks back his king as a showdown value, or he has to target a pair and bet a lot bigger, like closer to pot, in my opinion.
Yep. He picked up a flush draw on the turn, right?
No, I called it wrong. It was spades. He had king of spades, 10 of spades.
Okay,
I thought it was king of clubs, 10 of clubs.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think he definitely would have continued.
Yeah, okay.
He would have bet again if he had 2 clubs. Yeah, I think so too. All right. Anything else from Eric or Kim before we sort of sum this up? Yeah, Kim?
No, just that, you won the hand, but you probably should have folded on the flop.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I get a little sticky. Oh, yeah. And I think I'm
free.
Yeah. And let's talk about, okay. So let's talk about, before we let Carlos go, Carlos, so obviously everyone wants to 4-bet with their really strong hands, aces, kings, ace, king suited. I've noticed recently that they have stopped making strong hands, and there aren't any more strong hands available after that. So you have to start choosing some different kinds of hands to use if you're going to widen your 4-betting range. In a vacuum, what are some good hands to include to balance out a 4-betting range if you don't want to just be doing it with the top of your value range all the time?
Anytime you're bluffing, one of the things you want to consider is blocking your opponent's continues. So that also applies to 4-bet bluffing, which is why this hand is very reasonable, because a hand that your opponent would 3-bet and then 5-bet would be something like ace king, potentially ace queen, maybe not in the main event, but they probably at least call with it. So king queen suited is really nice for that, because it blocks those sort of hands. Obviously, it blocks kings and queens, which are also hands that you could face a 5-bet with. So hands that block your opponent's continues are always reasonable hands to consider for bluffing, and in this case, 4-bet bluffing. One of the things you want to think about is how likely it is your opponent is going to continue at all. So if they're going to continue often, you want to be blocking their continuing range, and that's going to do very well for you. But in this spot, if you were correct in your read that this guy's 3-betting way too wide, then you probably don't expect him to continue very often to a 4-bet anyway. In that case, you don't necessarily need the blockers you don't need to use something like king queen, because that hand also dominates enough of his wide 3-betting range that you don't want to give him opportunity to fold something like, say, king 10 off. And so in that case, you want to use a more polarized 4-betting range where you still want to use some blockers, but maybe with a hand that doesn't play as well post-flop, something like an ace-5 suited maybe, where you block his ace-king, you block his aces. But if you get 5-bet off of that hand, it doesn't suck as much as it does to get 5-bet off of king-queen suited. So if you expect him to either 5-bet or fold, using hands like ace-5 suited makes a lot of sense. If you expect him to call a lot, then something like king queen suited makes a lot of sense because it plays better post flop.
And you're even dominating some of the hands he's going to call with, because when he chooses not to re-raise you, he's going to come along with hands like king jack or queen jack, or hands that you have dominated there as well, which is a nice side effect of that. And they might even fold some bad aces, which are better hands than yours. So I can see why that makes it a great candidate. I've got one follow-up for that, and then we'll throw to Kim and wrap this up. You talked about King 10 suited being a sort of a reasonable 3-bet candidate. Sometimes I'm tempted to call with like the King 10 suited and instead 3-bet with a hand like King 10 offsuit, because I don't mind as much getting 4-bet off it, kind of like you talked about before. When would you choose to 3-bet with a suited Broadway like that? And when would you choose to 3-bet with an offsuit Broadway like that?
I would say the suitedness is helpful, but the really appealing thing is connectedness. So, for example, I don't want to 3-bet fold King Queen suited, because that hand just it's almost like aces post flop in my mind. Like I actually feel bad when I don't get action with that hand. So the fact that King 10 suited has the gap between the cards and it's not connected, that really hurts how well it plays post flop. The suitedness is nice, but you're going to flop 2 overs less often. You're going to flop straight draws less often. When you do hit a king, it's going to be dominated more often. So King Queen suited is vastly superior to King 10 suited. So I wouldn't necessarily put those 2 hands in the same category as hands that I would feel really bad having a 3-bet fold. So, yeah, I would say if you have a hand like a suited Broadway hand and you're thinking about 3-betting it, be more likely to 3-bet it if it's not connected and less likely if it is.
Nice. I like that. Kim, did you have one follow-up question here?
Yeah, not only that, like in my opinion, a King Queen suited out of position is generally, like I said before, just a call here. And the 3-bet is when you're exploiting your opponent. That we know, the 4-bet, I mean, is when we're exploiting an opponent that we know is 3-bet, getting out of line with their 3-bets. Because we don't really want to fold that to a 5-bet. We're just folding away all kinds of equity when we have to do that. So that's why it's generally just a call. But in this scenario, it can become a 3-bet. But I'm not a proponent of 3-betting King Queen suited out of position at any rate here.
Right.
Agreed.
Nice. Well, is there anything else that we'd like to ask Carlos? Carlos, is there anything from a strategy point of view that we sort of haven't teased out of you over the course of this conversation that you want to throw out there for our listeners?
No, I would say this was a very good conversation. And I think the whole idea of defending against C-bets is something that almost everybody needs some work on. And I'll just plug the fact that I just did a hand history review with Andrew Brokus, and he had a deep run in the Venom tournament on ACR, which is a $2,600 buy-in tournament. I think that one had like 4,000 runners, and he fished in the, I think, top 100, somewhere pretty deep. And we definitely discussed a lot of defending against C-bets and 3-bet pots and a lot of the same stuff we talked about here. So I would recommend that, which you can get at nickcast.com, which is the store for the Thinking Poker podcast. And also, I want to just say good luck to any of you guys who will be playing in the bracelet events that will be starting. Well, I don't know when this is going to come out, but September 10th, there will be your last chance to win a bracelet online here in the U.S. So the bracelet events start at the end of September or the middle of September. And Alex Fitzgerald and I did a project called How to Win an Online Bracelet, where we reviewed my deep runs from 2021. There was like 5 or 6 of them in bracelet events, and one of them actually culminated in winning a bracelet. You know, a little dust off the shoulder. But that one, you can, again, it's called How to Win an Online Bracelet. And you can contact me on Twitter for that. And I can get you a pretty big discount if you're interested in that.
Right on. Yeah. And I know Eric and Kim, if they're listening to this live as it happens, I think there's a good discount at the knit store right now. For this week for Labor Day, but our listeners are going to have to reach out to Carlos directly. And Carlos, what's that Twitter handle again if folks want to get in touch?
Hip Hop 101 Trivia. My DMs are open, so you can get in touch with me there. And just for like general information about me, go to that Twitter page and click on the tiny URL / Carlos Welch, and you can find out all my other coaching offerings.
Nice. And is it knitcast.com or knitcast.net? I'm getting some differing ideas in the chat here.
I'm pretty sure it's knitcast.com. No, I'm not in the chat.
I think it's .net. I just put it in my browser.
All right. Well, folks can try them both, and it won't take long to check them both out. There is a lot of great stuff there.
Yeah, I tried knitcast.com and it redirected to knitcast.net. So that's the actual.
There you go. Well, Carlos, thank you so much, man. It's been so cool getting to know you better and listening to you on the Thinking Poker podcast with Andrew Brokus every week. I've said before, that's my favorite poker podcast. So if somehow folks are listening to the Rec Poker podcast and they haven't checked that out, you've got something like 350 back episodes people could go and catch up on that for. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your shining your light with us here in the poker world. I always have such a good time when we talk. So yeah, folks, do go check out Carlos's stuff. And I want to thank Carlos, but I also want to thank Kim and Eric for coming and joining us on the show this week, like always. And Mark Prashant at Website Amp, and the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and you, the listeners. Thank you so much.